You're listening to the Fan2Fan Podcast, and on this episode, we're talking about, wait till you hear this title, Reflections of Fear, How Horror Remakes Mirror Their Times. Pretty good title. Here we go. All right, folks, you're listening to the Fan2Fan Podcast. One of your hosts, Bernie Gonzalez. With me, as always, fellow co-host Pete Charbonneau. And Pete, every once in a while, I happen upon something on the interwebs that seems to catch my interest. And in this case, it was an article by the good folks at Nerdist. And specifically, the author of the article is Ariel Fisher. And you can find more about her at her website, arielfisher.com. And she wrote an article that talked about horror remakes and how they are vital social political mirrors of their times. A very heady title for what seems to be a very heady article, but I think might make for a very interesting conversation.
Well, first off, reading articles, Bernie? Okay, Grandpa. Two, being preeminent socio-political figures that we are, I feel like this article is right up our alley. We're often asked to speak at highly prestigious think tanks on such topics. So, who, if not us, to tackle this subject? So everyone listening, you're in for a real treat here. Let me tell you that.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Yes. So I like the entryway for this article, at least, because we've been talking about a lot of horror recently. And I think there's also something about remakes, right? When you combine horror and remakes and kind of put them together, because I don't know about you, but usually when someone, a studio talks about doing a remake, it feels like my gut instinct is this necessary?
The zombies are on the attack again in Night of the Living Dead. And our next film is a remake of George Romero's classic 1968 black and white cult horror film. It was made on the cheap 22 years ago. The original movie, however, earned a lot of praise for its low-key, sometimes droll approach to horror, with convincing zombies who just kept on coming, slowly, tottering, and steadily so. The new version, also written by Romero but directed by Tom Savini, is in color, but features many of the same elements. The zombies, slow on the attack, against a man and a woman who find themselves trapped in a farmhouse. Nothing special there. There are a few plot twists from the original, but the overall spirit of the movie is the same, leaving the obvious question, why was this film made? And aside from monetary reasons, I can't think of a single good reason. In fact, if this has been the picture made in 68, it wouldn't have been a cult film.
Wouldn't have liked it then. No, this movie is so close to the original that it doesn't bring anything new to the party.
Correct.
And if you're going to look at a movie called Night of the Living Dead, you might as well look at the first one. It's a lot better. So that's it.
Nothing more to say.
I've seen the remake to John Carpenter's The Fog. I have seen the prequel to The Thing, and they have gotten the same reaction out of me that I presume they got out of you. Hollywood running out of ideas. Are we really recycling these classics? Is this necessary? If it ain't broke, don't fix it. That sort of feels like my gut instinct when it comes to the horror remake.
Yeah, that's mine too. It's usually recoiling in fear, but not in a good way. It's in, oh no, because there's a decent chance that I'm going to see it anyway, because you want to compare and contrast, and but yeah, it's interesting, right? How when remakes are done well, you can have a conversation, hopefully as good as the one that we're about to have about some of these. The caveat being that most remakes are the cash grab, are the, oh, here's some property that we can maybe squeeze out a couple of more dollars from because it's been 10, 15, 20 years. Remakes don't have the best reputation.
First of all, remakes in general are popular now because of the amount of money a company has to spend advertising to get people in the theaters. And one way to cut through the clutter of advertising that's out there is to come with a title in recent memory that they've heard of. So, for instance, all the horror remakes. Maybe the thinking is maybe you saw it with your brother when you were young on home video, or you've seen it on television, and we're going to update it. So it has a built-in awareness, which is the number that they're trying to reach, to get the audience, the customer out there, aware that your movie is in the theaters. And it tends to be why they remake horror.
But there are a handful that do capture by intent or just by the time that they're released in, they are kind of capturing some of the zeitgeist, whether it be cultural, socio-political, what have you, like either on the surface or sometimes lying many layers below it. That just seems to resonate. And, I think we're going to be talking mostly the horror genre here, and horror famously known for dressing up different fears that we may have and maybe putting a bag over the head, a hockey mask, or a nondescript William Shatner mask, as it were, to kind of dress it up and make it a little more palatable and more entertaining rather than, actually tackling what the fear is getting at. So, yeah. So let's see where we take this one.
You mentioned cash grab, and I think that's also part of that idea of like, why do these remakes even get made? It's an easy way to get money, nostalgia, maybe it's technology that's caught up. I think in some ways, the one thing that makes remakes unique is that the filmmakers, you have to assume, one, they're making it with the best of interests. Maybe they were moved or influenced by the original work, whatever it was, and now they kind of want to revisit those themes. But in some ways, they kind of get the luxury, too, of like starting on second base. For the most part, you have to think most people in that audience may be peripherally aware that there was another movie like The Fog. And even if they don't know anything about Adrienne Barbeau or Tom Atkins or Jamie Lee Curtis, they might have a sense. John Carpenter did that. Well, didn't he do that Halloween? Okay, I think I know what I'm getting into. Maybe that's a movie that my older brother, cousin watched and it was quote unquote old. So I'll watch this new one with a bunch of CW stars in it. And then unfortunately they're disappointed because it doesn't hold a candle to the original. There's something about also, I think, that idea that most movies don't get to start on second base, that you don't get the luxury of an audience having a sense for what they're sitting down for. Most of the time, outside of trailers and previews or what have you now, we're going in blind. But when you see that there is a remake to Invasion of the Body Snatchers or Thing from Another World and John Carpenter's The Thing, you might have a sense of what it is. But I think the other part you said too, it's also product of their time. And it feels like that's what this article was kind of getting at. Like the idea of the remake as a mirror, every generation gets the monster they deserve. So The Thing from Another World, 50s, horror, sci-fi, creature feature, 1980s, The Thing, very much a byproduct of the 80s.
I'll say a word about horror. Horror has been with cinema since the very beginning. It grew up part and parcel with the image, with cinema. And it will always be with us. It's one of the most popular genres of all time. And it's an all-purpose genre because it keeps changing. Every culture, every few years, it morphs. It changes into something else. It brings the sensibilities of the age in which it's made, that's what's so fabulous. If you look at Frankenstein or Dracula or The Bride of Frankenstein, the Karloff films that were made at this studio, they're very much of the 30s and the Depression. They're Depression-era movies. They're speaking to those audiences. But if you look at modern horror films, they're speaking to you guys. And they bring the sensibility that you've become used to seeing and you demand seeing in film.
Let's actually rewind a little bit and let's go back to the 1950s. Alien invasions, they symbolize Cold War paranoia. And in 1956, Invasion of the Body Snatcher comes out. That's the first movie that this article points out.
They come from another world, spawned in the light years of space, unleashed to take over the bodies and souls of the people of our planet, bringing a new dimension in terror to the giant super scope screen.
You have no choice.
From city to city, an incredible hysterical panic spreads. As the unimaginable becomes real, the impossible becomes true.
Directed by Joe Siegel, famously Kevin McCarthy as Dr. Miles Benelli. You have this doctor, returns to his hometown, finds the residents that are behaving strangely, friends and family, loved ones. They seem to have been replaced by imposters, emotionless imposters, right? And then he uncovers alien seed pods. They're duplicating humans perfectly and erasing their individuality. And then I think the most famous part of the movie is in some ways the climax, the end, where he's racing through the streets in a panic, warning us, the viewer, the audience, looking at the camera, breaking the fourth wall, warning all of humanity that there's this danger of mass conformity, of loss of identity. That's the theme of 1956's Invasion of the Body Snatchers.
You
Do you remember the first time you saw that one?
I don't. I won't say that it was always on, but it certainly would catch it enough times on local New York TV on a Saturday morning. But it was among the pantheon growing up of, like, you know, if they came on, like, even in the 70s, it was already considered a classic. So obviously, not being alive at the time, I don't know what the contemporary accounts of it were, but clearly you watch it now, just even a passing interest or knowledge of where we've come from, you can see how this mirrored, like, stuff with the Cold War and communism, and the Soviets are coming and we're all going to be mindless drones working for the state. You could be subsumed by that, or are you going to fight against that red wave that was starting to, you know, engulf certainly the United States and many other countries in, at times, misbegotten attempt to stem the tide.
Knowing the intelligence of the people involved, they may not have been conscious of what they were doing, but it's certainly deep. There's stuff going on there, a lot of stuff going on there.
Is there a theme? A lot of people think in these terms. They do themes and so forth and so on, and philosophize about it.
One sort of took it for granted that it was an ism, something taking over the world. Communism or fascism or whatever it was. And I think I took it for granted that that's what educated people would think.
In times like these, most men become highly suggestible. They listen eagerly for any voice which sounds authoritative.
When the film came out, it received a lot of notoriety. Surprised the people who made it completely. The producers, the director, the writer, surprised them because people saw it as a metaphor for McCarthyism. It doesn't always matter what the director or the people who made it think. It's really more important what the audience takes away from it. And in that context, at that time, that's what they thought.
I am not and never have been a member of the Communist Party.
It was a very real thing. You had the McCarthy hearings around this time as well. A lot of people in Hollywood were blacklisted. It was not a great time to be called a communist in this country. And the fear was very real. And that kind of was personified through a movie like Invasion of the Body Snatchers, the original.
And I think after, World War II, where you had the boom of all the soldiers kind of coming back, you had suburban sprawl. There's stuff in this movie that's probably tackled, I think, more upfront by movies like The Stepford Wives. That's another movie that I remember watching and falling in love with, like, the look and the feel of the movie. And it was too heady for me at the time. It's no different than this now. Watching Invasion of the Body Snatchers, Earth versus the Flying Saucers. That's a great double feature on a Saturday afternoon. I wasn't thinking about foreign indoctrination in this movie. It's like, no, that was completely over my head as a kid. I was just like, I'm going to eat my cereal, not worry about communist infiltration. That's what Red Dawn is for. Wolverines! It's movies like this is like, oh yeah, you can see it now. That idea of, like, suburban conformity. Can you trust your neighbors? Are they going to be the people that you've always known? The fearing of, like, the other. That's all the stuff that's kind of like in Invasion of the Body Snatchers in 56. And again, in, like, the article points out, in the 78 remake of the movie.
Invasion of the Body Snatchers may be the best movie of its kind ever made, says Pauline Kael in The New Yorker. For undiluted pleasure and excitement, the American movie of the year. Walter Spencer on WOR Radio salutes the best special effects of the year. Better than Superman, certainly worthy of an Academy Award. Invasion of the Body Snatchers. From United Artists, rated PG, parental guidance suggested.
Going back to that idea, the filmmakers for the 78 one, that's Philip Kaufman who directed it, they get to kind of start on second base, because whether you saw this movie or not, you're kind of aware that it was dealing with all these issues of conformity, even if it was doing it through alien seed pods.
Yeah, and I love the 78 version. I've really grown to love it even more in recent years, although it always intrigued me, because I do remember watching it for the first time on cable, and just that kind of spooky opening when you've got, like, that membranous whatever, like the alien forms, like, kind of making their voyage to Earth was just really unnerving. I want to jump back real quick to the 50s, because you brought up something that there was a town on Long Island called Levittown.
Consider Levittown, Delaware Valley, USA. One of the world's largest single-unit housing developments. located in the fast-growing industrial area between Philadelphia and New York City. Here, 16,000 low-cost homes are being constructed on spacious landscape lots, bordering gently sloped, winding streets.
One of the first towns that had what we now call like community associations, like HOAs and whatnot. Yeah.
Yeah. And cookie cutter homes being built. Obviously, I was born later than that, but we had developments nearby where I grew up in Smithtown, where I remember being very striking to me because I'd go over a friend's house and be like, okay, cool. It was always cool to go over a friend's house because it's like a different home and you get to, be away from your parents and you can kind of just goof around. And then going to another friend's house, I'm like, this house is exactly the same. Like it's the exact same layout. And at my young age, it just didn't dawn on me that there would be building plans that the homes would be built like the same way. So that was my first really experience with that. And I just remember finding it didn't weird me out so much as I'm like, this is just kind of interesting how Doug's house and Jay's house are, other than the furniture, essentially the same. That's just kind of interesting. So you had that whole effect coming out of World War II, where it's like, oh, we're just going to build these communities and start of the idyllic suburbs that would then kind of get upended when we got into the 70s and what we've talked about before with things like Halloween and Friday the 13th and the stranger danger, and all of a sudden your close-knit well-groomed neighborhood is now being invaded by some sinister force, perhaps.
And it's not a place that you think that anything evil could take place, but it's, people are trapped in there and they scheme and there's trouble in the suburbs, always.
To jump it back forward to what you also mentioned with the 78 version of Invasion of the Body Snatchers, the othering. I think this is a theme that resonates with me as I've gotten older too, is kind of like the individuality portion of it. And I think a lot of that for me has to do with growing up being a very shy kid, being very introspective, and coming a bit late to embracing my own individuality. I always felt like, I didn't want to rock the boat and I was kind of just doing my own thing. Out in public, I was shy and I wasn't letting my personality out. And it took me a long time to kind of really get what that meant to me, and then to start to allow that personality to shine a bit more. You mentioned the othering. I can't think of a more spot on depiction of what othering was kind of depicted at than the end of this movie, which is kind of unfortunately like it's your downer ending, and not spoiler alert, but when Veronica Cartwright is walking up to Donald Sutherland, at the end, thinking like, oh, Matthew survived too, and he kind of does like that eerie.
It's almost mimetic now. Like we kind of know that shot, even if you don't know what movie that's from.
Yeah, and he does the pointing at her, like completely othering her, of like, you're the only one left. And we've all been taken over by the pod people. Like, what an ending! And like I said, I've grown to love that movie more and more each time that I've watched it as I've gotten older.
We watched the original movie, and as we were growing up as young adults, I didn't need a movie to make me fearful of being an outcast in grade school. High school.
Oh God, no, that fear was real and was lived every day.
That's right. The pressures of like fitting in, things like this movie, the 78 version, the original too, like just that idea of like trying to suppress difference, where you were talking about like in Levittown, that post-war architectural plan of keeping things the same, pushing that forward towards being in a high school class where you don't want to be different. So you try to get the gym shoes that everyone else can, even if your parents kind of tell you that they can't afford it, which was something very much that I remember happening in my life, to the point where I remember going to a camp and every kid was buying like British Knights and Reeboks and Nike, and we certainly could not afford them. And we bought some shoes at Payless. Now I can laugh about it, but I remember feeling that pressure of trying to draw the Nike swoosh symbol on the side of my Payless shoes so that no one would at least look at my shoes and think like, oh, they're cheap shoes. Why? Just this idea of like fitting in, trying to create as much roundedness around me so you don't have sharp edges. Because sharp edges just means people are just going to pick at you and do the Donald Sutherland thing and just point at you and be like, you're different now because you're actually not like the rest of us.
Can we see you for a minute?
These students are starting to suspect their teachers are from another planet. Guess what?
Now we're gonna have some fun.
They're right. Now, these 6 students won't just question authority. They'll have to destroy it.
No way!
The faculty.
Please report to the principal's office.
Rated R in theaters every.
The Faculty, that does that for like an early aughts Scream generation, but it's all still there. Just that vulnerability that I think a lot of us had growing up, but also a vulnerability that's really kind of like a societal fear, because then whether it's the 56 movie, the 78 movie, it's still there. It's still this feeling that whether it's alien invasions or I think like you mentioned that intro that I always remember, like, oh, that had to have been inspired by things like the Andromeda strain and how we were starting to understand science and how is that visualized? Well, in the movie intro, DNA and genetics. And since we understand that, people might understand that more than alien takeover. But the fear we count that brought all of you guys into this theater that you'll fear more than anything is feeling like you're different.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. And it's interesting too, how when you're growing up, like, you know, especially when you're younger, for the most part, there's always the outliers. Those were the people that you're just kind of like, you looked at in awe because for whether by an innate ability, DNA, whatever it was that they just kind of knew from an early age, like that it was okay to buck the trends. That was not you. That was not me. Like we were just trying to fit in. And so anything that brought attention to me, it brought up such anxiety and such fear in me. Like, I mean, I like to think that I had a great sense of humor and I told some not necessarily good jokes, but I could be really funny. But like, it was always like with my close friends, like could not do that within the classroom setting. Or I was just like head down, like just don't draw any attention to yourself because it usually involved getting picked on in some way. You know, I wouldn't call it bullying. It was just, there's the in-group and the out-group. And I was, for the longest time, part of that out-group. Like one of the things that was very common in junior high for us was called decking books. I don't know if you had this where you grew up, but when you would be walking the halls in junior high and sometimes you didn't have, depending on where your classes were, for periods, you didn't have time to go back to your locker room. So you would have like your Trapper Keeper and maybe 3 or 4 textbooks under your arm. Some of the kids thought that it was hysterical as you're walking down the hall and not aware. They would just knock them all out of your hands. They'd scatter all down the hallway, and the hallway's usually filled with everyone getting to and from class. So you had to like on your hands and knees go and pick this stuff up. You know, just horrible, slightly traumatizing stuff. And I wasn't the only one that was subjected to it. Like a lot of us were, but like, this is the shit that stays with you because we're talking about it now. You know, to get to the point where you are starting to embrace that individuality when you get older, it's a very liberating thing.
This is a movie that people don't forget once they see it. And particularly because it involves people seeming to be who they are, but then maybe not being who they are. And there's obviously a malign reason for that in this movie. In real life, there's also malign reasons for it. But it's a movie I think that still resonates today.
One of the things I really was intrigued by in reading the Nerdist article was that the author mentions with the Invasion of the Body Snatchers remake, how when this movie came out, it was right around a big push for the Equal Rights Amendment, which unfortunately is still not ratified in this country by a large number of states. But in the 70s, there was a big push to get this ratified. And, it talks a lot about, and you see it in the story with, was it Maud Adams' character, like her husband, played by Art Hindle, even when he's taken over, is very much like controlling of her life. And it's like, your life is based, you owe everything to me. And so I found it again, like with the downer ending where she doesn't make it, even after she breaks away from him. It's like you're kind of hoping at that point, like, well, she's at least achieved emancipation from him, but then to still kind of get subsumed by the pods by the end of the movie, it's just like, man, like, it's tackling some things. And like you were saying earlier, when you're younger or even now, like you can see all this subtext, you can interpret it, you can choose to think about it, or you can just take it as an entertainment vehicle and just be like, this movie's kind of creepy, this movie's fun. So, and you can just, however you want to take it. I think that's the great thing about movies is that, however deep you want to dive, and at least, make mention of those things, because I think that it's important too, especially, in the time of the 70s when, female characters are starting to gain a little more agency in films like this, like horror movies, especially, and slashers, a couple of years removed from Invasion of the Body Snatchers, like women were oftentimes there to be exploited, and to kind of have that revolution happen over the decades until now, where it seems like they're on a much more even playing field with, you've got a lot more female directors, creators, it's a very different landscape than it used to be.
It may sound like an alternate reality to some folks that are listening, and in some ways I am grateful for that. But I've heard so many times my mother-in-law talk about how she would have to essentially have her husband, my father-in-law, get permission for her to have a credit card that she would use, during the time when my wife was growing up. Again, for people who may be listening to that, that just doesn't sound like our reality, but that is a reality that our mothers were actually dealing with at the time that this movie was coming out, which kind of goes back to that idea of like whether or not the movie, the 1978 Invasion of the Body Snatchers, is directly talking about the Equal Rights Amendment. There is stuff there certainly about women's vulnerability in a society that's trying to, in some ways, play containment. If I can control your spending, then you need me to get access to things. And there's something there, again, about control, isolation, assimilation, like, well, I guess I have to let my husband sign off for me to have a credit card. You kind of take that logic further. How could a woman escape a situation that she wouldn't want to be in without maybe access to money? It would feel like you were stuck because you couldn't rent a car and just leave, or get your own apartment, or take your children out of a terrible situation. So what do? You assimilate. And that's something that, again, is kind of shown in these movies. If this 58 movie was about the Cold War, this movie, whether or not it did it on purpose, mirrors some of the stuff that was happening at that time, including women's rights.
Absolutely, for sure.
The ending of both of the movies, like you talked about, the Donald Sutherland pointing, can't forget that. The you're next that McCarthy does in the original movie. The original movie I always remember as ending there, and that feels like the bleak, unresolved version. But the studios, I was finding, did actually have Don Siegel do another ending. So that was his original one, end it right at the park where Kevin McCarthy escapes the Pod People town, and he's essentially giving us all the warning, you're next. If in the sequel, in the remake, they're kind of saying like, it's too late. The assimilation has already happened. The original still gave you a sense it couldn't happen because they tacked on that ending. So Allied Artist Picture was like, no, that's too downbeat. Let's go ahead and do something that feels a little bit better. And they wanted to create a little bit of moral clarity, be like, oh, good wins over evil, right? So they gave it more of a hopeful narrative where you do have the Dr. Miles Benelli basically telling people like, you don't believe me?
Doctor, will you tell these fools I'm not crazy? Make them listen to me before it's too late! Listen to me. Please listen. If you don't, if you won't, if you fail to understand, then the same incredible terror that's menacing me will strike at you!
A truck driver mentions there was an accident and there were seed pods in the back. So it's like, oh, maybe what he's saying isn't ridiculous, but also letting a little bit of the air out of the balloon for the audience. There's a layer of optimism. Maybe guys don't freak out and leave the theater thinking that everything's going to end and that there is no course correction for this. That reminded me that the Halloween 3 season of The Witch came out in 1982, and that has a bleak ending.
Dark masks, gather round your TV set. Put on your masks and watch. All witches, all skeletons, all jack-o'-lanterns.
The third commercial, it's still on, please. Take off the third channel, it's still running. Stop it, please, for God's sake, please stop it. There's no more time. You've got to, please, stop it now, turn it off. Stop it, stop it, stop it, stop it, stop it!
And I was listening to Timothy Wallace, who directed Halloween 3. And he talked about how that ending for the original The Invasion of the Body Snatchers, he felt like he was aware that that was not what the director Don Siegel intended. And in some ways, the ending for Halloween 3, he was trying to kind of course correct for what they were not able to do.
I think Universal lost a little bit of belief and faith in the movie. They requested that we do something about the ending because it's not a happy ending. It's not the good guys won. And to John's eternal credit, he brought that to me. He was in control. The final cut was in his hands. But he treated me like a seasoned final cut director and asked me what I wanted to do and that he would honor that. And he just put that to me. And I thought about it for, the length of, it was on the same phone call. I didn't have to stop and sleep on it or anything. And I said, John, let's leave it the way it is. And that's partly as a tribute to a movie that didn't get that luxury, the original Invasion of the Body Snatchers, Don Siegel picture. They tacked a bookend ending on that movie that kind of let the audience off the hook that, the authorities have been contacted and it's all going to be okay. The only bad thing about Invasion of the Body Snatchers is that silly bookend structure that they tacked on because they didn't want to leave the movie with Kevin McCarthy staring into camera saying, "You're next. Yeah. You're next." Well, that's the proper ending for that movie.
Oh, totally.
So in a way, I was just doing that for Don Siegel and trying to set the record straight. Turn it off. Turn it off. It's Kevin McCarthy.
Oh, absolutely.
Again. Only Tommy Atkins is doing the work. And I thought it was the proper place to end the movie.
Halloween 3, all right, well, not a remake, but certainly part of a franchise. And that one more blatantly, corporate brainwashing, consumer control, capitalism, that's on the forefront. And then you just happen to have a Celtic warlock that's trying to take advantage of kids' buying habits in order to melt their brains and bring about Halloween, Samhain, whatever it is that he's tried to do that many years later we all love. And also in some ways, Tommy Lee Wallace being like, well, Invasion of the Body Snatchers wasn't able to do that, but I'm going to do that because that's also the ending we need now in 1982. We don't need maybe the optimistic ending and getting the permission and the ability from the studio and John Carpenter to say, yes, in Reagan's America, this is the commentary we're going to make because this is a movie for the 80s.
And just wait till 86 rolls around and John Carpenter's Does They Live?
As a child of the 50s, I grew up watching old science fiction, monster horror films. And one of the classics of the 50s was Invasion of the Body Snatchers, which is there among us, but we can't really tell. When Reagan was elected, I was at first confused. He's talking from a rich man's point of view. Reaganomics was don't get in the way of the rich because if they make more money, then you'll get some.
You can have a little taste of that good life too. Now I know you want it. Hell, everybody does.
And during his time in office, he'd started destroying the unions and poverty increased. And I thought, where's my country going here? Why are so many people buying into this? I wanted to strike out in some way, so I cast the Republicans as alien creatures.
I'm sure because it was, dollar signs in the eyes of producers, like they're trying to get Halloween 3 to tack on that, like, we don't want to send the audience. It's Halloween. People should be having a good time. We don't want to send audiences coming out of the theater, like really.
They're already going to be asking, where's Mikey Myers?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Seriously. Right. It's probably like, oh, man, we're already up against it here. Can we at least give them something to be happy about?
I'm sure it comes to no surprise to anyone that's listening, Pete, that we have a very, very biased fondness for John Carpenter. He obviously comes up in just about every conversation, every podcast episode we have. So obviously our love for Halloween and then obviously by extension Halloween 3, super obvious.
Totally silly. Totally.
Before we talk more John Carpenter, which we'll have to do in part 2 of this discussion, because we have other movies that they mentioned in the article that we want to highlight, because again, Ariel Fisher did such a great job in noting some movies and how they are mirrors to things that are happening in society and culture. But I think, to kind of go back to Invasion of the Body Snatchers, especially that 56's version is about ideological conformity. 78's about emotional and societal disconnection. In one of my notes here, because I did want to mention how you also have that idea, I think, of urban alienation. The first movie takes place in this small rural town. Everyone knows each other. There's something that I think kind of harkens back to War of the Worlds and even those Cold War anxieties of aliens attacking, of the Russians attacking, of communism coming on our shores. And the 78 movie moves the action to San Francisco. You get an urban center. You have this fear of sameness, this fear of emptiness, loneliness that we now see that has become very much an anxiety, almost epidemic, connecting those movies, the remakes, and how it all goes back to that idea that the author of the article sets up really well. And by giving examples like Invasion of the Body Snatchers, the remake, and comparing it to the original, is that they continue to be a part of this cultural conversation, that these movies tap into what's happening in society, and because of that makes them a little bit more timeless than maybe some of those fun atomic age movies that we talked about earlier, watching on like a Saturday morning matinee, and those are fun. But when you can go back and watch some of these movies, some of these classics that in some ways, intentional or not, set up an allegory about a fear our parents had in the 80s that we were starting to feel in the 80s that has morphed, evolved, and changed into even the present day.
And yet, in many ways, things seem to be pretty decent. Global poverty is declining, medicine's better, we're living for longer, and most people across the world are far less likely than ever to be murdered. But we're also exposed to more looming threats: financial crashes, political corruption, nuclear war, and of course, the slow, painful death of that spinning rock we live on. They say that every generation thinks it's the end of the world, but with leading scientists anticipating climate catastrophe, the fresh memory of history's most boring pandemic, and the doomsday clock closer than ever to midnight, it feels like our apocalypsizing has a little more empirical weight behind it. And yet in popular culture, there's no distinctive climate change monster, no COVID creature, no universal symbol of our terror. And maybe that's because we're all frightened in different ways.
So that feels like a good place to end part one of our discussion, Pete. In part two, I think folks hopefully will look forward to listening to us continue this conversation that, again, was prompted by a Nerdist article that we stumbled onto. These horror remakes are vital socio-political mirrors of their time. That was written by author Ariel Fisher. And in her article, she talks about other movies, including The Thing from Another World, and then the 1982 John Carpenter remake re-envisioning The Thing. So sorry, folks, can't escape from us talking about John Carpenter, but we'll also talk about the 1986 remake of The Fly, The Crazies. That was a remake of the original 1973 The Crazies by George Romero. As we're moving with these movies to the present day, they are reflecting present day issues. 9/11, the Iraq War, Hurricane Katrina, the pandemic, government distrust. That's why we love movies. We love articles like this that make us think about the movies, and hopefully you enjoy us talking about the movies. So as always, thanks for listening to the Fan2Fan Podcast.